The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Marcus Chen pressed his face against the small porthole to get his first look at Kethmaran Prime. The planet hung before them like a bruised pearl, its surface swirled with angry purple storms and patches of sickly yellow land masses. Not exactly a vacation destination, he thought grimly. "Human Marcus," came a voice behind him, the universal translator making the alien words sound stilted and mechanical. He turned to see Commander Veltar approaching, her 6 legs clicking against the metal floor in that unsettling rhythm he'd grown used to over the past week. The Kethmoran looked like a cross between a spider and a praying mantis, with gleaming black carapace and 4 arms that ended in wickedly sharp claws. "We arrive soon," Veltar continued, her compound eyes reflecting the ship's harsh lighting. "You understand your mission?" Marcus nodded, checking the equipment strapped to his chest one more time. The pulse rifle felt familiar in his hands, even if it was alien tech. The basics were the same across the galaxy, it seemed. Point, shoot, kill. Kill the shadow maw that's terrorizing your mining colonies. Payment on completion. Yes. Veltar's mandibles clicked together in what might have been approval. Many of our finest warriors have tried. All have failed. The beast grows bolder each cycle, and our people grow more afraid. Marcus had heard the stories during the journey. The shadow maw, they called it. A creature the size of a small building, with hide like living metal and claws that could shear through reinforced steel. It had appeared 6 months ago in the Thornspire Mountains, where the Kethmaran had their most productive mining operations. At first, it had only attacked the automated equipment, but as time went on, it began hunting the workers themselves. The death toll was climbing into the hundreds. "Tell me again why you think a human can succeed where your people have failed," Marcus said, settling back into his restraint harness as the ship began its descent. Veltar's 4 arms gestured in a complex pattern that the translator couldn't interpret. "Humans are different. Your species has a reputation. You fight wars that should be impossible to win. You survive in conditions that would kill most sapients. You adapt." She paused, her head tilting at an uncomfortable angle. "And you are expendable." The blunt honesty didn't surprise Marcus. The Kethmaran weren't known for their diplomacy. They were a practical species, viewing most problems through the lens of simple efficiency. A dangerous creature was threatening their operations, so they found the most cost-effective solution: hire a human mercenary. The ship touched down at Outpost Gamma 7 with a grinding thud that rattled Marcus's teeth. Through the porthole, he could see the mining facility spread out below them like a metallic infection on the planet's surface. Massive extraction towers pierced the ground at regular intervals, their surfaces scarred by the constant storms. In the distance, the Thornspire Mountains loomed like broken teeth against the turbulent sky. "The beast was last seen 3 days ago attacking Tower 17, Veltar said as they made their way to the airlock. "It destroyed the structure completely. 15 workers died." Marcus shouldered his pack, checking his environmental suit one last time. The atmosphere was breathable for humans, but the air was full of particulates that could damage lung tissue over extended exposure. "Any patterns to the attacks?" "Random," Veltar replied immediately. "No warning, no apparent triggers. It simply appears, destroys, and vanishes back into the mountains." The airlock cycled open, and Marcus stepped onto the surface of Kethmaran Prime. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard, and the air tasted of metal and ozone. The mining facility buzzed with activity, but he could see the fear in the workers' movements. They scurried between buildings like mice, constantly looking over their shoulders toward the mountains. Outpost Commander Zector met them at the landing pad, his carapace bearing the ritual scars that marked him as a veteran warrior. "Human," he said without preamble, "you will kill the Shadow Maw?" "That's the plan," Marcus replied, noting how the nearby workers had stopped to stare at him. He was probably the first human most of them had ever seen. "I'll need to study the attack sites first, get a feel for its behavior patterns." Behavior patterns? Jektor's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was confusion. "It is a beast. It kills. What more is there to understand?" Marcus bit back his first response. The Keth Moran were a hierarchical species with a rigid social structure based on strength and dominance. To them, a dangerous predator was simply an obstacle to be removed through superior force. The concept of actually studying their enemy was foreign to them. "Humor me," he said instead. The first attack site was a twisted ruin of metal and crystal. Tower 12 had been one of the older extraction points, its deep shafts reaching far into the planet's crust, where valuable minerals could be harvested. Now it looked like it had been hit by an artillery barrage. Support beams were twisted into impossible shapes, and the main shaft had been sealed with debris. Marcus knelt beside the largest set of claw marks, running his gloved fingers along the gouges in the metal. Each mark was nearly a meter long and cut clean through reinforced steel plating. Whatever had made these marks possessed incredible strength, but there was something else, something that nagged at his soldiers' instincts. "The workers who survived," he said to Jektor, who had insisted on accompanying him. "What did they say?" "Terror speech," the commander replied dismissively. "Screaming about eyes like burning coals and roars that shook the ground. Useless testimony." But Marcus pressed for details, and slowly a picture began to emerge. The Shadow Maw didn't just attack randomly. It seemed to target specific areas of each facility, focusing on the deep extraction equipment while largely ignoring surface structures and defensive positions. It moved with purpose, not the blind rage of a simple predator. The pattern became clearer as they visited more attack sites over the following days. Tower 7, Tower 15, Tower 21. All of them deep shaft operations. All of them targeting the planet's core mineral deposits. And in each case, the creature had seemed more interested in destroying the equipment than hunting the workers. "It's not just killing for food or territory," Marcus said on their third day, as they stood at the edge of the latest attack site. "It's specifically targeting your deep mining operations." Veltar's compound eyes fixed on him. "Explain." Marcus pointed to the remains of Tower 21. "Look at the destruction pattern. If this was a simple predator attack, you'd expect random damage, maybe some feeding signs, but this is surgical. It went straight for the core extraction systems and ignored everything else. Even the worker barracks are mostly intact." "You think the beast is intelligent?" Jektor asked, his tone suggesting he found the idea ridiculous. "Maybe. Or maybe something else is going on." Marcus shouldered his rifle and looked toward the mountains. "I need to see it for myself." The Keth Moran were reluctant to let him venture into the thorn spires alone, but Marcus insisted. He'd studied the terrain maps and identified several cave systems that could serve as potential lairs for a creature the size of the Shadow Maw. If he was going to understand what they were dealing with, he needed to observe it in its natural environment. The mountains were a maze of twisted spires and deep canyons, carved by millions of years of the planet's violent storms. The rock itself seemed to pulse with a faint bioluminescence, casting eerie shadows that shifted and danced as Marcus made his way through the narrow passes. His environmental sensors picked up strange readings, electromagnetic signatures that didn't match anything in his database. He found the first cave system 3 hours into his trek, a gaping maw in the mountainside that descended into absolute darkness. His thermal sensors showed no heat signatures, but there was something else, a faint vibration in the rock, almost like a heartbeat. Marcus activated his helmet lights and ventured into the cave, his rifle ready. The passage twisted downward, the walls smooth as if they'd been carved by flowing water. But there was no sign of moisture, and the air was completely still. The heartbeat vibration grew stronger as he descended, and soon he could hear it as well as feel it. A deep, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from the very bones of the mountain. His comm unit crackled with static, the electromagnetic interference growing stronger with each step. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, and Marcus's lights revealed something that made him freeze in amazement. The walls were covered in what looked like crystalline growths, but they pulsed with that same bioluminescent glow he'd seen outside. The formations were intricate, almost organic in their complexity, and they seemed to respond to his presence with subtle shifts in color and intensity. But it was what lay in the center of the chamber that took his breath away. The Shadow Maw was there. But it wasn't the rampaging monster he'd expected. The creature was easily 20 meters long, its hide a shifting pattern of metallic scales that seemed to absorb and reflect the crystal light. But it wasn't moving with predatory aggression. Instead, it was curled protectively around something at the chamber's center. Marcus crept closer, using every bit of stealth training he'd ever received. As his position changed, he could see what the creature was guarding. More crystal formations, but these were different. Smaller, more delicate, and pulsing with a soft, warm light that reminded him of a campfire. The Shadow Maw's head turned toward him, and Marcus found himself staring into eyes that glowed with an inner fire. But there was no rage there, no predatory hunger. Instead, he saw something that shocked him to his core: intelligence and pain. The creature made a sound, not the roar of a monster, but something softer, almost like a whimper. It shifted its massive bulk, and Marcus could see that one of its legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. Old injury, probably from one of the Keth-Moran hunting parties. But it was what happened next that changed everything. One of the crystal formations near the creature's head flickered and dimmed, its warm light fading to nothing. The Shadow Maw let out a keening cry that made Marcus's heart clench, gently nudging the dead crystal with its snout. When it didn't respond, the creature's great head dropped to the ground, and its whole body shuddered with what could only be grief. Marcus slowly lowered his rifle, understanding flooding through him. The creature wasn't a mindless monster terrorizing the mining operations. It was trying to protect something. These crystals, they were alive in some way, and the deep mining was killing them. The Shadow Maw looked at him again, and this time Marcus saw something different in those burning eyes. Not aggression, but desperate hope. As if the creature somehow understood that this strange bipedal visitor might be different from the others who had come with weapons and death. Moving slowly, Marcus set down his rifle and activated his suit's external speakers. "Easy," he said softly, the way he might speak to a frightened animal. "I'm not here to hurt you." The creature's massive head tilted, and Marcus could swear there was something like recognition in its expression. It made that soft sound again, almost questioning. Marcus took a step forward, then another. The Shadow Maw watched him, but made no aggressive moves. Around them, the living crystals pulsed with their gentle light, and Marcus began to understand the true tragedy of what was happening here. The Keth-Moran weren't just mining mineral deposits. They were destroying a living ecosystem, one that this creature had been desperately trying to protect. The attacks on the mining towers weren't random acts of aggression. They were the actions of a parent trying to save its children. As this realization sank in, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of reaching for his weapon, he slowly extended his hand toward the creature, palm open in the universal gesture of peace. The Shadow Maw stared at him for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, lowered its great head until it was just inches from Marcus's outstretched hand. The creature's breath was warm against his environmental suit, and he could feel the gentle vibration of its heartbeat through the rock beneath his feet. For the first time since arriving on Keth-Moran Prime, Marcus smiled. He wasn't here to kill a monster. He was here to save a friend. The touch between human and creature lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. As Marcus's gloved hand made contact with the Shadow Maw's snout, he felt a strange tingling sensation that had nothing to do with the electromagnetic fields surrounding them. The creature's eyes widened, and for a brief instant, Marcus could have sworn he felt something like gratitude flowing through their connection. Then the moment passed, and the Shadow Maw pulled back, but not in fear or aggression. Instead, it seemed to be studying him with newfound interest, its great head tilting as if trying to understand this strange being who had approached without weapons drawn. Marcus spent the next several hours in the crystal chamber, moving slowly and carefully as he examined the living formations. Each cluster seemed to serve a different purpose in the underground ecosystem. Some pulsed with a steady rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. Others flickered in complex patterns that suggested some form of communication. The largest formations, the ones the Shadow Maw guarded most closely, glowed with a warm light that seemed to nurture the smaller growths around them. It was a family, a community, and the mining operations were tearing it apart piece by piece. The Shadow Maw watched his every movement but never interfered. When Marcus approached one of the dimmer crystal clusters, the creature made a low rumbling sound that wasn't threatening but seemed almost explanatory, as if it was trying to tell him something about what he was seeing. Marcus's comm unit had been silent since he'd entered the caves, the electromagnetic interference too strong for normal communication. But as evening approached on the surface above, he knew he would have to return to the outpost eventually. The Kethmaran would be expecting a report, and he wasn't sure what he was going to tell them. As he prepared to leave, the Shadow Maw did something unexpected. It moved away from its protective position around the central crystals and approached one of the chamber walls. With surprising delicacy for such a massive creature, it used one claw to scrape at the rock surface, revealing fresh crystal growth underneath. The newly exposed crystals were different from the others. Smaller, darker, and pulsing with a weak, erratic light. The Shadow Maw looked back at Marcus, then at the crystals, making that same soft, questioning sound. Marcus stepped closer and saw that these formations were growing toward the surface, following the path of the mining shafts. The creature was showing him how the deep extraction was disrupting the crystal network, cutting off the flow of whatever energy sustained this underground civilization. "You're trying to heal them," Marcus said softly, more to himself than to the creature. But the Shadow Maw's eyes focused on him intently, as if it understood. "The attacks on the mining towers, you weren't just destroying them randomly. You were trying to reconnect the damaged networks." The creature made a sound that might have been agreement, then did something that nearly stopped Marcus's heart. It extended one massive claw and gently, carefully, drew a series of lines in the soft earth at their feet. The pattern looked almost like a map of the mining facility, with the damaged crystal networks marked in precise detail. This wasn't just an intelligent creature. It was trying to communicate complex tactical information. Marcus knelt beside the crude map, using his helmet light to study the markings. If he was interpreting this correctly, the Shadow Maw was showing him exactly where the mining operations were doing the most damage to the crystal ecosystem. More than that, it seemed to be indicating which areas could be repaired if the extraction stopped. "This is incredible," he whispered, and the creature's ears perked up at the sound of his voice. "You're not just protecting your territory. You're trying to save your entire civilization." The Shadow Maw moved closer, its massive head lowering until it was at Marcus's eye level. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two entirely different species trying to bridge a gap that should have been insurmountable. Then the creature did something that shattered every assumption Marcus had made about alien intelligence. It spoke. Not in any language he recognized, and certainly not in sounds that human vocal cords could produce. The words resonated through the crystal formations themselves, turning the entire chamber into a living amplifier. But somehow, through the electromagnetic fields and the strange connection he'd felt when they first touched, Marcus understood. Pain, loss, desperation, the slow death of everything beautiful in the world. The crystal song lasted only a few seconds, but it left Marcus shaken to his core. He'd felt the Shadow Maw's emotions as clearly as if they were his own. The creature wasn't just intelligent, it was deeply, profoundly sentient, capable of complex emotions and abstract thought. And it was dying. Not physically, though Marcus could see the toll that months of desperate fighting had taken on its body. But emotionally, spiritually, watching its world be destroyed one mining shaft at a time. "I understand," Marcus said, and he meant it. "I'll find a way to help. I promise." The return journey to the outpost took on a completely different character. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to figure out how to explain what he'd discovered to the Kethmoran. They were a practical, militaristic species with little patience for abstract concepts like ecosystem preservation or cross-species communication. To them, the Shadow Maw was simply an obstacle to be removed. But Marcus had seen something in those burning eyes that he couldn't ignore. Intelligence, yes, but more than that. A desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone would understand. He arrived back at Outpost Gamma 7 as the first of the planet's 3 moons was rising, casting the mining facility in an eerie silver light. Commander Jektor was waiting for him at the main entrance, along with Veltar and several other high-ranking Kethmoran officers. "Report!" Jektor demanded immediately. "Did you locate the beast?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I found its lair in the Thornspire Mountains. It's definitely using the cave systems as a base of operations." "Excellent." Veltar's mandibles clicked with approval. "You will lead a strike team to eliminate it tomorrow." "Actually," Marcus said, "I think we need to reconsider our approach here." The silence that followed his words was deafening. The Kethmoran officers exchanged glances that their anatomy made difficult to interpret, but Marcus could sense their confusion and growing irritation. "Reconsider?" Jektor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Human, you were hired to kill the beast, not to think." Marcus held his ground. "The situation is more complex than we initially understood. The creature isn't just a random predator. Its attacks are targeted, purposeful. There's an intelligence behind them." "So?" Veltar stepped forward, her forearms spreading in what Marcus recognized as an aggressive posture. "Intelligent or not, it is killing our workers and destroying our operations. The solution remains the same." "But what if there's another solution?" Marcus pressed. "What if we can find a way to resolve this conflict without violence?" The reaction was immediate and hostile. Several of the officers began clicking their mandibles in a rapid staccato that the universal translator couldn't keep up with. But Marcus didn't need a translation to understand their outrage. "You speak of compromise with a beast that has murdered hundreds of our people," Jektor said, his voice rising to a harsh buzz. "This is why many consider humans weak. You lack the will to do what is necessary." Marcus felt his temper flare, but he forced himself to remain calm. "It's not weakness. It's intelligence. If we can understand why the creature is attacking, maybe we can find a solution that benefits everyone." "The only solution is death," Veltar declared flatly. "You will complete your mission, human, or your contract will be terminated along with your payment." The meeting ended badly, with the Kethmoran making it clear that they expected Marcus to lead a strike team into the mountains within the next 24 hours. As he made his way to his assigned quarters, Marcus could hear them discussing the situation in their rapid, clicking language. He caught enough to understand that they were questioning whether hiring a human had been a mistake. That night, alone in his small room, Marcus stared up at the alien constellations through his window and tried to figure out what to do. He'd given his word to the Shadow Maw that he would help, but he was also under contract to the Keth Moran. Breaking that contract wouldn't just cost him his payment, it would likely make him an enemy of one of the galaxy's most militaristic species. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those burning eyes staring back at him, full of intelligence and desperate hope. He remembered the creature's gentle touch, the way it had tried to communicate through the crystal song, the careful map it had drawn in the earth. The Shadow Maw wasn't a monster. It was a person. Different from humans, different from the Keth Moran, but a person nonetheless. And Marcus couldn't bring himself to murder a person, no matter what his contract said. The next morning brought grim news. Another attack had occurred during the night, this time at Tower 9 on the far eastern edge of the mining complex. The damage was more extensive than usual, and there had been more casualties. The Keth Moran were in an uproar, demanding immediate action. Marcus accompanied the strike team to the attack site, but his heart sank as he surveyed the damage. The Shadow Maw's desperation was becoming more evident with each attack. The creature was taking greater risks, doing more damage, probably because it could sense that the crystal ecosystem was reaching a critical point. "You see?" Jector gestured at the twisted wreckage with two of his arms. "The beast grows bolder. It must be stopped before it destroys everything we have built here." But as Marcus studied the destruction pattern, he noticed something the Keth Moran had missed. The attack hadn't been random. The creature had specifically targeted the facility's deep core extraction systems while leaving the surface infrastructure largely intact. More telling, it had avoided the worker dormitories entirely, even though they would have been easy targets. The Shadow Maw was still trying to minimize casualties while protecting what it could of the crystal network. It was fighting a war, but it was fighting with restraint and precision that spoke to a moral code the Keth Moran couldn't understand. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Instead of leading the strike team into the mountains, he went alone, carrying not weapons, but supplies, food concentrates, medical equipment, and something else, a portable communication relay that might allow him to bridge the gap between species. The Shadow Maw was waiting for him in the crystal chamber, as if it had known he would return. The creature looked tired, its scales dulled and several new wounds visible on its flanks. The desperate fighting was taking its toll. But when it saw Marcus approaching without weapons, something changed in its posture. The great head lifted, and those burning eyes focused on him with what could only be described as relief. Marcus set down his supplies and activated the communication relay, adjusting the settings to work with the chamber's unique electromagnetic properties. If his theory was correct, the device might be able to translate the creature's crystal song into something he could better understand. "I'm here to help," he said simply. "But I need to know more about your people, about what's really happening here." The Shadow Maw approached the communication device with curiosity, sniffing at it delicately. Then it moved to the center of the chamber and began to sing. This time, with the relay amplifying and translating the crystalline harmonics, Marcus heard not just emotions, but actual concepts. Images flowed through his mind, visions of the crystal networks as they had been before the mining began, vast underground cities of living light stretching for kilometers beneath the planet's surface. He saw the Shadow Maw's people, creatures of living metal and crystal who had dwelt in harmony with their environment for millions of years, and he saw their decline, the slow extinction as the mining operations severed the connections that sustained their civilization. The Shadow Maw, whose real name translated roughly to Guardian of the Deep Songs, was one of the last of its kind, desperately trying to preserve what little remained of its people's legacy. The communication lasted for hours, and by the end of it, Marcus understood the true scope of the tragedy. The Kethmoran weren't just mining mineral deposits. They were committing genocide against an entire sapient species that they didn't even know existed. But knowledge and action were two different things. As Marcus prepared to leave the chamber, he knew that convincing the Kethmoran would be nearly impossible. They had too much invested in the mining operations, too much of their military pride wrapped up in defeating the beast that had defied them for so long. The guardian of the deep songs seemed to understand his dilemma. As he reached the chamber entrance, the creature called out to him in its crystal voice, and this time the message was simple and clear. Trust, hope, together. Marcus looked back at his unlikely friend and nodded. Together, he agreed. The real battle was just beginning. Marcus didn't return to the outpost that night. Instead, he remained in the crystal chamber, working alongside the Guardian to understand the full extent of the damage to the underground ecosystem. Using his portable scanner and the creature's intimate knowledge of the crystal networks, they began mapping the areas where restoration might still be possible. What they discovered was both heartbreaking and hopeful. The mining operations had severed nearly 70% of the original network, but the remaining connections were still strong. If the deep extraction could be stopped, if the damaged pathways could be repaired, the crystal civilization might survive. But time was running out. Each day brought new mining operations, new damage to the delicate network that sustained the Guardian's people. Marcus could see the toll it was taking on his new friend. The great creature moved more slowly now, its luminous scales dimming with exhaustion and grief. "We need to act fast," Marcus said as he studied the readouts on his scanner. "But I'm going to need your help to convince my own people that this is necessary." The Guardian responded with a complex harmony that his translator interpreted as a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The creature understood the stakes, but it had no reason to trust other outsiders. Every contact with the surface dwellers had brought only pain and destruction. Marcus spent the next day preparing for what he knew would be the most important conversation of his life. He recorded everything: the crystal songs, the mapped network, the evidence of the Guardian's intelligence and emotional depth. If he could just make the Kethmoran understand what they were destroying, surely they would be willing to find another solution. He was wrong. Commander Jektor's reaction to Marcus's recordings was swift and brutal. "You were hired to eliminate a threat, not to conduct scientific research," the commander said, his mandibles clicking with rage. "Your unauthorized communication with the beast is an act of treason against this operation." "It's not a beast," Marcus insisted. "It's a sapient being. The last guardian of an entire civilization that's been living under this planet for millions of years." "Impossible," Veltar interjected. "Our geological surveys found no evidence of any advanced civilization. These are mineral deposits, nothing more." Marcus pulled up his scanner readings, showing the complex network patterns and the electromagnetic signatures that indicated biological activity. "Your surveys missed it because the crystal networks operate on frequencies your equipment wasn't designed to detect. But they're alive, and they're intelligent, and we're killing them." The room fell silent as the Kethmoran officers studied the data. For a moment, Marcus dared to hope that he was getting through to them. Then Jektor spoke, and that hope crumbled. "Even if your claims are true," the commander said slowly, "it changes nothing. This facility represents a massive investment for our people. Thousands of jobs, millions of credits in infrastructure. We cannot simply abandon it because of some underground dwellers." "But we could modify the extraction methods," Marcus pressed. "Work around the critical network nodes, maybe even establish some kind of cooperative relationship." "Cooperation with lesser species is not the Kethmoran way," Veltar cut him off. "We are the dominant form of life in this sector. All others exist at our sufferance." The casual cruelty of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd known the Kethmoran were militaristic and hierarchical, but he hadn't truly understood how deep their supremacist attitudes ran. To them, The Guardian's people weren't just obstacles to be removed. They were inherently inferior beings whose suffering didn't matter. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said quietly. "The Guardian has shown remarkable restraint in its attacks. It could have killed hundreds more workers if it wanted to. It's been trying to minimize casualties while protecting what's left of its civilization. But if you force it into a corner, then it will die like any cornered animal," Jector finished. "Human, you have 48 hours to complete your original mission. Eliminate the creature, or we will do it ourselves and terminate your contract." Marcus left the meeting knowing that negotiation was no longer possible. The Kethmaran had made their choice, and it was the choice of genocide over coexistence. But Marcus had made his choice too, and it was the choice to stand with his friend. He spent that night gathering supplies and equipment from the outpost's armory. Not weapons. He was done with violence, but tools that might help him protect what remained of the Crystal civilization. Portable shields, communication equipment, medical supplies. If the Kethmaran wanted a war, he would make sure it wasn't a one-sided massacre. The next morning brought ominous news. Long-range sensors had detected Kethmaran military ships approaching the system. Not just a few vessels, but an entire battle group. Whatever restraint the local commanders had shown was about to end. Marcus made it to the crystal chamber just as the first explosions echoed through the mountains. The Kethmaran were beginning a systematic bombardment of the cave systems, trying to collapse them from the surface. The Guardian was in the center of the chamber, its massive body curled protectively around the largest crystal formations as debris rained down from above. "They're not going to stop," Marcus said as he activated his portable shields around the most critical crystal nodes. "They've brought in the military. They mean to finish this today." The Guardian's response was a song of such profound sadness that Marcus felt tears streaming down his cheeks. But mixed with the sorrow was something else, a fierce determination that reminded him why this creature had fought alone against impossible odds for so long. Protect. Preserve. Remember. "Not alone," Marcus said firmly. "Not anymore." The bombardment intensified, and Marcus could see cracks appearing in the chamber walls. The ancient crystal formations were beginning to dim as their connections to the greater network were severed. But the Guardian had one last, desperate plan. The creature moved to the center of the chamber and began the most complex song Marcus had ever heard. Every crystal in the cavern responded, their light growing brighter and brighter until the entire space blazed like a star. Marcus's instruments went wild as massive amounts of energy began flowing through the chamber. Through his translator, he heard the Guardian's explanation. The crystal networks weren't just communication systems. They were also storage devices, repositories of millions of years of accumulated knowledge and culture. If the physical network was going to be destroyed, the Guardian could download everything into a smaller, more portable configuration. But the process would require all of the creature's life energy. "No," Marcus said, understanding what his friend intended. "There has to be another way." The Guardian's great head turned toward him, and those burning eyes met his one last time. The creature's final message was simple and clear. Live. Remember. Tell our story. Before Marcus could protest further, the Guardian completed its song. Every crystal in the chamber pulsed once with blinding light, then went dark. The massive creature collapsed, its life force spent in the effort to preserve what it could of its people's legacy. Marcus knelt beside his friend's still form, grief and rage warring in his chest. The Guardian had sacrificed everything to save a few fragments of its civilization, trusting a human stranger to carry that precious burden forward. Above them, the bombardment had stopped. The Kethmaran would be sending troops down to confirm the kill soon. But the chamber was no longer empty. Scattered around the Guardian's body were dozens of small crystal formations, each one glowing with a warm, steady light. The compressed essence of an entire civilization, waiting to be awakened in some safer place. Marcus began gathering the crystals, his hands shaking with emotion. Each one felt warm to the touch, and he could sense the vast knowledge contained within. History, art, science, philosophy, all the achievements of the crystal people preserved against the darkness. The sound of boots on stone announced the arrival of the Kethmoran troops. Marcus stood as Commander Jektor entered the chamber, flanked by a full squad of warriors. "The beast is dead," Jektor observed with satisfaction. "Your mission is complete, human." "Yes," Marcus said quietly, slipping the last of the small crystals into his pack. "It's complete." But as they made their way back to the surface, Marcus was already planning his next move. The Kethmoran thought they had won, that they had eliminated the threat to their operations. They didn't know that they had simply created a new enemy, one who understood their language, their technology, and their weaknesses. More importantly, they didn't know that the crystal people still lived. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of a human research station orbiting a distant world. Below them, the planet's surface was covered with the familiar glow of crystal formations, but these were different from the ones on Kethmoran Prime. These were new, grown from the seeds the Guardian had died to preserve. The lead scientist, Dr. Sarah Chen, approached with her latest report. "The integration is proceeding better than we hoped," she said. "The crystal entities seem to understand that this is a sanctuary world. They're cooperating fully with our research protocols." Marcus nodded, watching the lights pulse and flicker across the planet's surface. The crystal people were rebuilding, adapting to their new home with remarkable resilience. But they were also changing, incorporating new ideas and perspectives from their human hosts. "Any word from the Guardian?" he asked. Dr. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "It's difficult to say. The consciousness patterns we've detected are definitely different from the others, more complex and individualized. But whether it's a true resurrection or just an echo," she shrugged, "we may never know for certain." Marcus touched the small crystal pendant hanging around his neck, a gift from the newly awakened crystal entities. Sometimes, when he held it close, he could swear he felt a familiar presence, a sense of gratitude mixed with an endless, patient love. The Kethmoran, meanwhile, had discovered that killing the Guardian hadn't solved their problems. Without the creature's restraining influence, the destabilized crystal networks had begun releasing chaotic energy bursts that made mining operations impossible. Their great investment on Kethmoran Prime had become worthless, and they were facing economic ruin. Some of the more progressive Kethmoran leaders had begun reaching out to human mediators, asking for help in understanding what had happened. Marcus had agreed to serve as a consultant, though he made it clear that any discussion would have to include representatives of the crystal people. The first interspecies conference was scheduled for next month. As Marcus watched the crystal lights dance across the planet below, he thought about the Guardian's final message. Live. Remember. Tell our story. He had done all three, and in doing so, he had helped birth something new, a partnership between species that transcended the old patterns of domination and submission. The Guardian had died to save its people, but in trusting a human stranger with that precious burden, it had also planted the seeds of a future where no species would have to face extinction alone. From his pack, Marcus pulled out his personal recorder and began composing his next report for the Human Colonial Authority. The story of the Guardian needed to be told, shared throughout human space, as a reminder of what was possible when different species chose cooperation over conflict. But first, he had a promise to keep. Marcus touched his crystal pendant again and spoke softly into the recorder. "This is Marcus Chen, Human Colonial Authority Xenospecies Liaison, recording a message for the archives. I want to tell you about my friend. Its name translates as Guardian of the Deep Songs, and it taught me that friendship isn't limited by species, language, or even the physical form of life itself. As he spoke, the crystal lights below pulsed in rhythm with his words, and Marcus could have sworn he felt an echo of that ancient, patient love flowing back to him across the void. The Guardian lived on, not just in the crystal networks of its reborn people, but in the choices of every being who chose understanding over fear, cooperation over domination, friendship over enmity. And Marcus Chen, former human mercenary turned interspecies diplomat, had become the bridge between worlds that his friend had always believed he could be. In the end, that was the most human thing of all. The refusal to accept that understanding was impossible, that friendship couldn't transcend any barrier, that hope wasn't worth fighting for, no matter how dark the odds. The Guardian had chosen well when it decided to trust a human, and Marcus had chosen well when he decided to trust a friend.